I want you to do something for me just right now as you're listening.
Oh, an interactive start. I like it.
Yeah, right? Just reach out and pick up something near you.
Like a pen or something.
Yeah, a pen, a coffee mug, your phone, just anything with a bit of heft to it. Just hold it in your hand for a second, move it up and down.
You can really feel that downward pull when you do that.
Exactly. You feel that weight pressing into your palm.
Mm-hmm.
We are taught, from the very beginning of our science education, that what you're feeling right there is mass.
Right. The absolute fundamental property of matter.
Right. We're told it's the primitive building block of the universe, the raw stuff that makes up the object.
That's the classical view, yeah.
But we are looking at a theoretical framework today for this deep dive that, well, it suggests everything you just felt. That absolute physical certainty of solid matter is essentially a localized illusion.
Which is just a massive thing to wrap your head around.
It really is. What if that weight in your hand isn't a fundamental property of the object at all, but rather like an echo?
An echo. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Like a resonance vibrating up from this hidden multidimensional lattice that actually dictates the very flow of time.
It requires a just a total departure from how we intuitively experience the world.
Because we trust our senses so much.
Exactly. We rely so heavily on sensory input to define what reality even is.
Yeah.
When a stone feels heavy to you, you just assume heaviness is this intrinsic quality of the stone itself.
Right. It's heavy because it's heavy.
Right. But throughout the history of physics, we've repeatedly found that our senses, they only capture the absolute surface layer of what's actually going on.
Just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. And what we're unpacking today takes that detachment to its absolute limit. It suggests that the feeling of a solid object is merely the byproduct of mathematical operations happening at an infinitely deeper layer of reality.
And this framework, it comes from a deeply complex, groundbreaking theoretical physics paper published in 2026.
Like George James Dukas, right?
Yes, by George James Dukas. And it's titled The Transdimensional Unified Field Theory.
Or TDUFT for short.
TDUFT, exactly. So for this deep dive, our mission is to decode this thing. We're going to focus primarily on how this theory completely reconstructs the concept of mass.
Because it's not just a minor tweak.
No, not at all. We aren't just talking about, finding new particles or slightly adjusting Einstein's equations.
No, this is a ground-up rebuild.
We're going to try and decode a universe dictated by time density and golden ratios and really look at how reality might be built from the bottom up without relying on mass as a starting ingredient.
And to appreciate just how radical this is, we have to look at the foundation it's trying to replace.
Right, the stuff we all learned in high school.
Exactly. For over a century, our dominant paradigm has been anchored by Einstein's mass-energy equivalence, E = mc squared.
The most famous equation in the world.
Right. And even though Einstein showed that mass and energy are interchangeable, the classical view still treats mass as this foundational pillar.
Right, it's a given.
Yes. It's what physicists call a primitive scalar. It's just a given. If you have a particle, it has a set mass. End of story.
But TDUFT says nope to that.
Completely. The transdimensional unified field theory argues that there are no primitive scalars anywhere in the universe.
Wait, none at all?
None. Nothing just exists as a standalone given. Mass, in this view, is an emergent, multi-tier projection.
Okay, emergent projection. That's a dense phrase.
Think of a digital photograph on your phone.
Okay, like a picture of a tree.
Right, a picture of a tree. The tree isn't physically inside the screen, right?
Right, there's no tiny tree in there.
The image of the tree is an emergent projection of millions of underlying lines of code and rendering engines operating on binary data.
Oh, wow. Okay, so we have to stop thinking of mass as like the clay the universe is molded from.
Exactly.
And start thinking of it as the shape the clay takes when the universe, spins the wheel.
That's a perfect analogy.
Well, the paper hits this idea right away by defining mass not as a static object, but as an emergent resonance.
Resonance. That's a huge keyword here.
Yeah. And this resonance comes from a foundational infinite fractal field. It states this field is constructed from two fundamental operators, represented by the Greek letters phi and psi.
We should probably clarify what we mean by operators in this context.
Yeah, please do, because it sounds like math jargon.
Well, it is, but we aren't just talking about abstract mathematical symbols sitting on a chalkboard somewhere.
Right.
In this theory, phi and psi represent the fundamental geometric and dynamic actions of the universe.
Right.
They are the engine.
So they're actually doing something.
Yes. We will get into the specific mathematical nature of them later. It involves the golden ratio and wave dynamics, but for now, just understand that they represent the universe's foundational capacity to expand and contract.
Expansion and contraction, okay.
And the interplay between that expansion and contraction creates a field. It's from the turbulence and structure of that field that mass emerges.
Okay, so the paper provides a core conceptual equation for this emergent mass, and it links the mass of an object to the interplay between the speed of light, a temporal coordinate, and gravitational coupling.
Right, it's m equals c, key over g.
Which means, essentially, the amount of mass that emerges is a direct result of how light and time interact, scaled by the strength of gravity.
That's the baseline, yeah.
But here's where my brain really had to shift gears. It redefines what gravity actually is.
Oh, completely. Gravity has always been this weird outlier in physics.
Right. It doesn't fit neatly with the other forces.
No, it doesn't. In the standard model, we just treat the gravitational constant as a fixed number, big G.
But Ducas's theory says big G isn't constant.
Right. It argues that gravity is not a constant at all. It is a function of something called time density.
Time density.
Specifically, it posits an inverse quartic relationship. So gravity is determined by 1 over the time density to the 4th power.
Okay, so what does this all mean? I really had to sit with that phrase, time density.
It's not an intuitive concept.
No. We are so used to thinking of time as a straight line.
Yeah.
Right. A constant ticking clock that moves at the exact same pace everywhere, forever.
Newton's absolute time.
Exactly. So the idea that time can be dense or sparse just feels totally counterintuitive.
It breaks your brain a little at first.
It really does. But if gravity is an inverse function of time density, then regions of low time density have stronger gravitational coupling.
Yes.
And regions of high time density have weaker gravity.
The phrasing can be tricky, but think of time density as the concentration of temporal events or intervals within a localized area of the universal lattice.
Okay, so how much time is packed into a space?
Exactly. If an area is highly dense with temporal intervals, it requires less gravitational mediation to maintain its structure within the field.
And if it has low time density?
If an area has low time density, the lattice compensates. It uses a massively increased gravitational coupling to maintain stability.
Oh, I see.
The two are intrinsically balancing each other out to preserve the fractal geometry of the universe.
Okay, let me see if I can map this onto something physical for the listener, because this is dense.
Go for it.
Imagine you're moving your hand through a pool of water.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
The resistance you feel against your hand, that feeling of weight and inertia, is analogous to mass.
Right.
But the water itself, the medium you are pushing through, represents time.
Okay.
If the water suddenly becomes incredibly dense, like thick syrup.
Yeah, or honey.
Yeah, honey. The way you experience that resistance, the way your hand couples to that fluid, changes dramatically.
You'd have to push much harder.
Exactly. You feel a different inertial consequence simply because the medium has changed. So the mass you feel isn't just about your hand. It's about the relationship between your hand and the density of the fluid it's moving through.
The fluid analogy captures the relational aspect perfectly, actually.
Right.
The theory states explicitly that mass is the inertial consequence of embedding a temporal interval into the lattice through gravitational mediation.
The inertial consequence of embedding.
Yes. So when you measure mass, you aren't measuring a block of primitive stuff. You are measuring how deeply a system is embedded in this temporal fractal field.
It's the pushback.
Exactly. The resistance you feel is the lattice pushing back as it negotiates that embedding.
You know, it totally reframes a mundane act like stepping on a bathroom scale.
It really ruins the simplicity of a morning weigh-in.
Right. You look down at the number and you think you're measuring how much stuff is inside your body.
The classical view.
But according to this theory, you're actually measuring the inertial consequence of your physical structure being embedded in a specific temporal interval.
Which is wild.
You're measuring the intensity of your own structural resonance against the background of the universe.
It explains why mass feels so absolute to us, despite being fundamentally an illusion of structure.
Because it's so consistent.
Right. A resonance can be incredibly stable. Consider a standing wave in an acoustic chamber. The sound waves bounce back and forth, right? They interfere with each other in such a way that they create a wave that appears to stand perfectly still.
It just hovers there.
Exactly. It holds its shape.
Yeah.
You can measure its peaks and troughs, you can interact with it, but it isn't made of a primitive material.
There's no stuff there.
Right. If you turn off the speakers, the object vanishes. It is an emergent property of the environment and the energy moving through it. Mass is the standing wave of the temporal lattice.
Okay, wait. If mass is just a localized resonance, an echo in the temporal water,
Hmm.
how do we get from a vibrating field of time to the hyperspecific, measurable forms we see in chemistry?
The actual elements.
Yeah. How do we get carbon atoms, oxygen, the exact weight of an electron? Because pure resonance sounds, I don't know, chaotic, or at least smooth.
It does.
But the physical world is incredibly specific and categorized. The periodic table is very organized. So the paper bridges this gap by introducing a multi-tier architecture. It says this emergent mass has to project through 3 distinct stacked operating tiers before it becomes the reality we experience.
And this is where the theory moves from like philosophical implications into rigorous structural mechanics.
The actual math.
Yeah. It asserts that mass is the intersection of the ether lattice, the atomic lattice, and the nuclear shell.
Okay, 3 tiers.
3 tiers. And the author is adamant that these are not just 3 different perspectives on the same phenomenon. They're entirely different mathematical constructions.
They're built differently.
Yes. They operate on distinct logical rule sets, yet they stack on top of one another to produce physical reality.
Let's pull these apart, starting from the absolute basement of reality. The deepest level is the ether lattice, right?
Right. The ether lattice is where mass first emerges as a field-level projection.
So this is the bottom floor.
This is the deepest fractal substrate of that phi and psi field we discussed earlier. It's the raw ocean, where the relationship between light, time, and gravity first generates that standing wave of resonance.
The m equals c cubed t over g.
Exactly. It is entirely continuous, unbounded, and operates at the scale of the entire cosmos down to the subquantum. It's the raw potential for mass.
But raw potential doesn't build a table.
No, it doesn't.
So the resonance has to filter up to the middle tier, which the paper calls the atomic lattice.
The continuous geometric projection.
Right, the text describes it exactly like that. This tier is responsible for fractal scaling, recursion, and dimensional embedding, and uses something called a master coordinate, which it labels as D, to scale everything smoothly.
To translate all that complex operator algebra, you can basically think of the atomic lattice as the layer that gives mass its continuous spatial geometry.
Its shape.
Its shape and structure, yeah. It provides the architectural rules for how space is occupied. It allows structures to scale up and down proportionally.
So it's still smooth. Yeah.
Very smooth. If the ether lattice is the raw energy, the atomic lattice provides the continuous, smooth geometric rules for how that energy bends and shapes itself into dimensional space. It is entirely continuous. Every point flows smoothly into the next.
But again, if everything just flowed smoothly, we wouldn't have distinct elements,
Okay,
right?
we just have a blur.
We wouldn't have carbon behaving differently than nitrogen. So we hit the top tier, the final layer of the stack, the nuclear shell.
And this is where things get discrete.
Yes, it's described as a discrete projection. It deals in whole numbers, quantized jumps, and rigid boundaries.
So more smooth flowing.
Exactly. This is the tier that handles isotopes, radioactive decay, and the rigid boundaries between electron shells. It's where the smooth geometry snaps into rigid, countable physical reality.
And the defining characteristic of this multi-tier architecture is that they do not blend.
They don't mix.
No, you
Yeah.
cannot simply smash the equations for the ether lattice and the nuclear shell together and get a single reductive formula.
Why not?
Because they do not share the same recursion. The continuous geometry of the atomic tier and the jagged, discrete logic of the nuclear tier are fundamentally incompatible mathematically.
But they sit right on top of each other.
They do, and they rely on each other.
This reminds me of how modern video games are built.
Oh, how so?
Well, you have different engines running simultaneously that don't speak the same native language, but output a unified experience.
Okay, I follow.
So the ether tier is like the core processing logic of the hardware, right? The raw manipulation of memory and electrical resonance in the console.
The silicon itself.
Yeah. And then the atomic tier is the 3D geometry engine. It calculates smooth curves, lighting, continuous vectors, and infinite scaling.
Because in the math of a 3D engine, a curve can be infinitely smooth.
Exactly. It thinks in smooth mathematics. But then you have the physical monitor you're looking at, which represents the nuclear shell tier.
The screen.
The screen. And no matter how perfectly continuous and smooth the 3D geometry engine calculates a sphere to be, When that sphere has to be rendered on your screen, it must snap into a discrete pixel grid.
Ah, I see.
It has to choose a specific little square of light. You can't have half a pixel.
That rendering pipeline is a really strong parallel because the raw processing power is not the 3D engine, and the 3D engine is not the pixel grid.
They are totally different things.
They operate on entirely different logics: resonant logic, continuous geometric logic, and discrete indexing logic.
Right.
And just as a video game requires complex software bridges to translate those continuous 3D vectors into a discrete pixel grid without, crashing the entire system.
Without glitching out.
The universe requires mathematical bridges to translate the continuous atomic lattice into the discrete nuclear shell.
And that's exactly where I was getting tripped up.
It's the hardest part to visualize.
It is, because if they are completely different operating systems, how on earth does the universe render the picture without glitching out? And the paper answers this with what it calls projection bridges. The author states that these tiers are equivalent as operator outputs, even if they aren't identical in construction.
They come from the same source.
Exactly. They all descend from the same upstream source, and they connect through a very specific translation mechanism called the mass D-shell projection chain.
This projection chain is arguably the most vital piece of architecture in the theory when it comes to observable reality.
It's the translator.
It is. It's the specific sequence of operations that bridges the continuous geometry with the discrete pixels of matter.
Okay.
The chain is written as a sequence of mappings. It starts with the atomic number and time, represented as Z and T, which maps to the isotope-weighted average mass.
Nahavj.
Right. Then that average mass maps to the master coordinate D.
The smooth dial.
Yes. That coordinate is then passed through a bounding function, B of D, which finally maps to the discrete shell index K.
Okay, let's walk through that pipeline slowly because it's a lot.
Let's break it down.
So it starts with atomic number and time feeding into average mass. That makes intuitive sense to me because elements aren't perfectly stable, right?
Right, they decay.
They have isotopes, they decay over time. So the raw input is essentially asking the universe, what element are we looking at and what time is it?
Exactly.
And that gives us an average resonant mass for that specific moment. But then that mass is projected into this master coordinate, D. You mentioned D earlier, and it seems to be the linchpin of everything.
D is the fundamental dial of the continuous atomic lattice. Mathematically, it is defined as the speed of light multiplied by time.
C times T.
Yes. It acts as a relativistic, log-scaling coordinate. It links the flow of time directly with the fractal structure of space.
Wow.
In the context of this projection chain, D represents the smooth, continuous scaling of the universe. It is the unbroken dial that you can turn infinitesimally in either direction.
Okay, so we have the smooth dial D representing the continuous tier, but we have to get to the top tier, the discrete pixel grid of the nuclear shell, which is represented by K.
Right, the K shell.
To get from D to K, the projection chain uses an operator map that essentially acts as a rounding function. The math dictates that the continuous value of D has to literally snap to the discrete integer value of K.
But we have to ask why the universe requires a rounding function at all.
Yeah, why not just stay smooth?
Right. If the underlying geometry is continuous, why would the physical manifestation be continuous as well? Why force the mathematics through a bottleneck that rounds everything off?
That's a great question.
The author argues that this isn't just some arbitrary mathematical trick to make the equations work. It is structurally necessary to produce the physical phenomena we actually observe.
It's a feature, not a bug.
Exactly. And the paper points to a historical anomaly in chemistry to prove that this rounding function is real and observable.
Yes. This is where theoretical math suddenly crashes into high school chemistry, which I love.
It's a great real-world anchor.
It is. If you look at a standard periodic table, elements are ordered by their atomic number, which is just how many protons they have in the nucleus.
Right. Hydrogen is 1, helium is 2, and so on.
And the basic rule of thumb is that as you add more protons, the atomic number goes up and the mass goes up.
It's a generally linear progression.
Hydrogen is 1, it's light. Oxygen is 8, it's heavier. But there are spots on the table where reality glitches.
Anomalies.
Anomalies, yeah. The most famous is the boundary between argon and potassium.
Argon sits at atomic number 18. Potassium is atomic number 19.
So potassium has an extra proton.
Yes. And according to simple additive logic, potassium should be heavier.
Right. It has more stuff.
But if you measure their standard atomic weights, argon is heavier.
Wait, 18 is heavier than 19?
Yes. It represents a non-monotonic reversal. The mass goes up, 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 and then suddenly steps backward before continuing up again.
Now, classical physics explains this away by pointing to isotopes, right?
The standard explanation.
They say argon just happens to have a lot of heavier isotopes with extra neutrons that occur naturally, while potassium's natural isotopes are lighter.
So on average, argon outweighs potassium,
And it's just treated as a coincidence of elemental abundance.
like a statistical fluke.
Yeah, fluke. But TDUFT looks at that and says, no, that's not a coincidence. That is the rounding function of the universe in action.
Because the master coordinate D is continuous and the nuclear shell K is discrete, the mapping between them cannot be a perfectly straight single-valued line.
It can't be simple.
It acts more like a complex gear shift. The decay chain evolution of the isotopes is mathematically woven into that rounding function. The universe isn't just a bucket where you throw in protons and neutrons and weigh the result.
No, it's a highly structured projection.
Exactly.
Let's go back to the dial analogy for a second. You are turning the smooth, continuous dial of the D coordinate.
Okay.
And the dial turns perfectly smoothly. But the needle on the display, which represents the K shell, can only click into specific rigid grooves.
Like pixels.
Like pixels. It cannot hover between 18 and 19. As you turn the dial continuously forward from 18 to 19, the underlying mathematical rounding function, because it has to process all the complex wave dynamics, the isotopes, it forces the needle to actually slip backward into a heavier groove for a split second.
Reversal.
Yes, before snapping forward into the lighter potassium groove.
The non-monotonicity is a structural feature of the mathematics.
It's built in.
It is. The mapping of the continuous logarithmic D coordinate across the discrete atomic boundary is forced to fold back on itself slightly to maintain the stability of the lattice.
That is just incredible.
And TDUFT doesn't solve the argon-potassium anomaly by inventing a new subatomic particle or proposing a new fundamental force.
It doesn't need to.
No, it solves it by revealing that the mathematics of reality undergoes structural rounding. The periodic table isn't just a list of ingredients. It is a visible readout of a multi-tiered mathematical projection snapping into focus.
That concept alone completely rewires how I look at matter.
It's profound.
But, it forces us to dig even deeper. We have this continuous D coordinate and we have this rounding function.
Right.
Where do these roles come from? What sets the initial parameters for the continuous dial in the first place?
We have to go back to the very beginning.
Right. The paper traces everything back to a single foundational generative act. It calls it the eternum nexus equation.
The eternum nexus serves as the primordial seed of the entire framework.
The seed.
Yes. It is the mathematical origin point that unifies the two fundamental operators we introduced at the very beginning, phi and psi.
Okay, phi and psi.
Everything else we have discussed, the ether, the continuous lattice, the discrete shells, the mass resonance, is a downstream consequence of how phi and psi interact in this single equation.
Okay, let's unpack phi and psi because they aren't just arbitrary variables.
Oh, they have very specific meanings.
Phi is the golden ratio, which is roughly 1.618.
We see this ratio everywhere in nature.
Everywhere. In the spiral of galaxies, the arrangement of leaves on a stem, the shape of a nautilus shell.
It's a ubiquitous geometric proportion.
Right. And in this theory, phi is the operator for additive geometry. It represents velocity, expansion, the pushing outward of spatial structure.
It wants to grow.
Yes. And psi is its conjugate, negative 0.618.
The inverse.
The inverse. Psi is the operator for multiplicative wave dynamics. It represents time, contraction, and the pulling inward through zero separation.
So you have these two diametrically opposed geometric imperatives.
They're fighting each other.
Well, interacting. Phi demands additive expansion. Psi demands multiplicative contraction.
Okay.
The eternum nexus equation forces these two operators to interact. It establishes a boundary condition where the expansion of geometry and the contraction of time collide.
And what happens when they collide?
When they do, the right side of the equation resolves into pi squared.
Pi squared. The paper describes this resolution beautifully, actually. It says this interaction dissolves imaginary components into stable, real structure.
Dissolves the imaginary.
Yeah, it's as if the universe is just boiling with mathematical probabilities, complex and imaginary numbers. But the exact moment phi and psi lock together and produce pi squared, it crystallizes into physical reality.
That is the birth of the master coordinate, D.
And from D, the universe builds what the author calls a power hierarchy.
The power hierarchy is perhaps the most unifying concept in the entire paper.
It's like a cheat code for physics.
Oh, it really is. It suggests that all the diverse physical forces we experience, the things we have spent centuries categorizing as separate phenomena with their own distinct rules, are actually just different exponential depths of the exact same master coordinate.
Just powers of D.
They're all just powers of D.
Okay, I want to walk through this ladder because this part blew my mind.
Let's do it.
Okay, so D to the first power, just D, generates acceleration multiplied by density.
The base level.
Right. Then you square it, D to the second power, and you generate electromagnetic charge.
Okay.
D to the third power generates voltage.
Moving up the ladder.
D to the fourth power generates force. Just everyday physical force.
Right.
And D to the fifth power generates energy.
And because Einstein established that mass and energy are intrinsically linked to principle, this theory actually upholds through its own geometric logic. Mass is also a fifth power descendant.
So mass sits at D to the fifth power.
Yes. The theory describes it as the volumetric closure of the lattice.
Okay, I really need to pause here and make sure I'm observing this correctly. Are we saying that the electromagnetic charge of a battery
Yes.
and the physical force of a car hitting a brick wall
Yes.
are fundamentally the exact same thing, just operating at a different dimensional depth? Like force is literally just charge squared.
That is the core assertion, yes.
That is insane.
Electromagnetism, mechanics, gravity, they are not isolated silos of physics. They are simply different harmonic expressions of the same continuous geometric projection.
Just different octaves.
Exactly. Charge is a stable resonance at the second power. Force is a stable resonance at the fourth power. Mass is an incredibly deep, complex resonance at the fifth power.
But they all descend from the same structural DNA.
Exact same D coordinate.
It makes the universe feel so elegantly simple at its core. But it immediately sparks a question for me.
What's that?
If energy and mass are sitting down there at the fifth power of D, what stops the ladder?
Ah, the limits.
Yeah. What happens if you keep turning the exponent up? What is D to the sixth power or D to the 50th power? Does the universe just stop at 5?
The mathematics of the fractal field do not stop. The field extends infinitely.
So there's a D to the 1/1,000,000th power.
Mathematically, yes.
Yeah.
The paper addresses this by introducing the concept of infinite harmonic attenuation.
Attenuation, meaning it fades out.
Yes. The higher powers of D exist, but they dampen out rapidly due to entropy.
So they become like the hidden scaffolding.
Precisely.
They are there, vibrating at incredibly high exponents, but they lose energy so rapidly in our local manifestation of the lattice that we can't easily measure them. They just fade into the background noise of reality.
Exactly. We experience the universe primarily at the stable nodes, D squared, D to the fourth, D to the fifth.
The ones that stick around.
Right. But recognizing this hierarchy introduces a massive epistemological problem for traditional physicists.
How so?
Well, if all of physics is just a ladder of exponents derived from a single coordinate, then the way we measure the universe, the very units we use, are fundamentally flawed, or at least deeply misunderstood.
Which brings us perfectly into how this theory resolves contradictions.
And there are a lot of apparent contradictions.
Oh, yeah. Because if you hand this paper to a classical physicist, they are going to immediately point out what looks like a glaring mathematical error.
They zero right in on it.
Right. Because in one part of the paper, it says the average atomic mass is calculated by an equation that sums up the mass of isotopes.
The discrete calculation.
Right. But then in another part, it gives us that first equation we talked about, where mass equals c cubed times time over gravity.
The continuous calculation.
Right. And on paper, those two equations look totally different. The variables are different. The units don't align. They look completely contradictory.
In the classical scientific method, if you have two distinct equations attempting to describe the exact same physical property, and they don't match exactly.
One of them is wrong.
Exactly. The immediate assumption is that you have to discard one.
Right.
But TDUFT introduces a radical interpretive rule. It says units are secondary.
Okay, that is going to make a lot of scientists very uncomfortable.
Oh, absolutely.
Because science is built on units. Grams, meters, seconds, joules. We worship units because they ground the math in physical reality. What does it even mean that units are secondary?
It means we have to abandon the idea of primitive scalars again. When a classical physicist writes down 5 kilograms, they believe they are describing a fundamental standalone truth of the universe.
Like it's an undeniable fact.
Right. But TDUFT argues that 5 kilograms is not a foundational truth. It is an operator-generated output.
An output.
It is the very end result of a massive, complex calculation happening in the deep lattice.
So slapping a unit onto a number isn't adding physical reality to it. It's just revealing which projection tier you are currently observing.
It tells you which software engine rendered the output.
Wow. Okay, I think of it like looking at two different plans for the exact same house.
Let's hear it.
If I hand you a set of architectural blueprints, you see lines, angles, continuous geometry representing the walls and doors.
Right, the physical layout.
Right. But then I hand you an electrical schematic for the exact same house.
Okay.
It looks entirely different. It's filled with abstract symbols for resistors, switches, and discrete circuits.
Very different visual language.
Completely different. If you lay them side by side without any context, they contradict each other. The symbols are different, the logic is different, but they describe the exact same house.
I love this analogy.
Thanks. The units, the specific symbols used on the page, they just tell you which map you are holding. You need a bridge, an understanding of how the electrical circuits route through the physical walls to realize they are describing a single, unified structure.
The paper uses the exact phrase, united distinct constructions. Your blueprint analogy captures that perfectly.
So they aren't fighting, they're complementing.
Right. The universe allows for distinct mathematical constructions that unite to form a single reality. And this framework isn't just useful for explaining equations for mass.
No.
No, it applies beautifully to one of the most stubborn, seemingly contradictory dualities in all of quantum mechanics.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
The nature of the photon as both a wave and a particle.
Ah, the classic wave-particle duality. Just for the listener who might be rusty on their quantum mechanics, light has this infuriating habit of behaving like a physical particle, a photon, when we measure it a certain way.
Yes.
And behaving like a continuous wave when we measure it another way.
Which shouldn't be possible classically.
Yeah. Right. And classical physics just sort of throws its hands up and says, it's both, depending on how you look at it.
That's a paradox we just accepted.
But TDUFT frames this duality perfectly within its projection logic.
It resolves the contradiction completely by mapping the wave and geometric states to specific operator collapse points within the lattice.
Okay, collapse points.
The theory assigns the geometry of the lattice, the physical structural aspect, to the number 1.
Okay, one is structure.
And it assigns the multiplicative wave dynamics, the fluid temporal aspect, to the number 0.
So 1 acts as an attachment point.
Exactly.
When the projection hits that specific collapse point of 1, the energy acts as a point particle. It attaches to the geometric scaffolding of the lattice. It acts solid. It has a specific location.
Like a physical dot on a grid.
Right. But 0 is the separation point. When the projection hits 0, it acts as a free wave state, moving without attachment to the geometry.
It's fluid.
So they aren't contradicting each other at all. They're just alternating projection states of the same underlying phi and psi field.
And this alternation brings us to how the theory handles the speed of light.
Oh man, this part.
Because in classical relativistic physics, c, the speed of light in a vacuum, is treated as a given.
A constant.
It is a seemingly random speed limit imposed on the universe, roughly 300,000 kilometers per second. Einstein built his theories around the premise that this speed is absolute.
The ultimate speed limit?
But TDUFT fundamentally redefines what the speed of light actually is. It is not an arbitrary number.
This was the moment in the paper where the math just soared into something almost poetic for me.
It's quite elegant.
It really is. It redefines the speed of light as an infinite convergent series.
Right.
It is a precise harmonic projection of the phi and psi operators constantly interacting. It's not a car hitting a speed limit on a highway. It is the highway itself calculating its own geometry in real time.
That continuous calculation of geometry is crucial. The speed of light is the structural rhythm of the lattice.
The rhythm.
And the paper takes this new infinite series definition of the speed of light and plugs it all the way back into our very first equation, the one where mass emerges from light, time, and gravity.
Right, m equals c cubed t over g.
Yes.
And when you substitute that massive harmonic series for c in the mass equation, the math just explodes outward. It reveals that mass is actually a 24-dimensional harmonic resonance.
Now, this is the point where the framework stretches our intuitive grasp of reality to the breaking point.
To put it mildly.
It is mathematically sound within the operator algebra,
Hmm.
but conceptually, it demands a massive lead.
And I'm going to push back hard here because
Yeah.
I have to advocate for my own sanity and the listeners.
Fair enough.
I am sitting here in a room that goes up and down, left and right, forward and backward. That is 3 dimensions of physical space.
Yes.
I can look at a clock and see time passing. That is 1 dimension of time, so 4 dimensions total.
The standard space-time block.
Exactly. Where on earth are the other 20?
It's a very valid objection.
How does a 24-dimensional harmonic resonance actually matter to us if we can't see, feel, or measure 20 of those dimensions? Are they just mathematical parlor tricks?
The answer goes back to the concept of entropy and what the paper called fractal attenuation, which we touched on earlier.
Okay, the fading out.
Right. The infinite phi and psi field generates structure at all dimensional levels. The mathematics require those 24 dimensions for the golden ratio and the wave dynamics to perfectly balance and close the loop of the projection.
So the math doesn't work without them.
It absolutely doesn't. However, those higher dimensional modes dampen out rapidly in terms of raw energy. They lose their overt energetic presence.
So they just fade away.
They don't vanish. They become the structural scaffolding. The mass that we feel, the weight of that coffee mug from earlier, is simply the stable, resonant echo of those higher dimensions filtering all the way down and stabilizing at our specific 3D level. We don't perceive the 24 dimensions directly because they are the deep infrastructure holding up the three-dimensional reality we do perceive. If those higher dimensions collapsed, our 3D reality would lose its geometry.
You know, it makes me think of acoustics again.
Okay.
Specifically, striking a key on a grand piano.
Okay.
When I press the key for middle C, my ear tells me I am just hearing one single note.
Right, the C.
But if you analyze the sound wave, the sound I am actually hearing is composed of the fundamental frequency plus dozens of higher, fainter overtones vibrating along the string and resonating through the wooden soundboard.
Yes, the harmonics.
Exactly, the harmonics. The fundamental note, the C, is the mass we feel in 3 dimensions. But those 24 higher dimensions are the overtones.
That's a fantastic comparison.
We don't distinctly hear them as separate notes, right? But they are absolutely critical because they give the mass its exact timbre, its exact texture, stability, and character in the physical universe.
Without the overtones, a piano just sounds like a digital beep.
Exactly. Without the overtones, the note sounds dead, flat, and artificial. Without the 24 dimensions, mass wouldn't have the rich structural stability to form a solid object.
The overtone analogy perfectly illustrates how a multidimensional resonance collapses into a unified sensory experience. The higher frequencies are present and structurally necessary, even if they aren't the primary frequency you perceive.
Right.
But to govern such a massively complex 24-dimensional acoustic symphony, the universe cannot operate on chaos.
It needs a conductor.
It requires a master set of rules to keep the entire lattice stable and prevent the resonance from tearing itself apart.
And that brings us to the ultimate mechanics of the theory. We are moving beyond just mass now and looking at the overarching rules of the universe itself.
The big picture.
The biggest picture. The paper introduces the universe master equation.
Which is a bold title for an equation.
It really is, but it earns it. This is the grand unified theory in a single mathematical statement. This equation unifies the transport terms, the acoustic resonances, and the zero-point energy contributions.
It brings it all together.
It's the master algorithm that governs the master coordinate D across all scales of reality, from the expansion of massive galaxy clusters down to the deepest vibrations of the ether lattice.
And nested within that grand equation is the core strong sector equation.
The microversion.
Right. This specifically handles the intense, localized interactions within the discrete nuclear shell. It governs the strong nuclear force, which is what holds the nucleus of an atom together against the immense electromagnetic repulsion of the protons.
Because protons want to push each other away.
Violently, yes. But what is truly groundbreaking here is that both of these master equations, the macro-universe equation and the micro-strong sector equation, are heavily modulated by phi, the golden ratio.
So the force holding a microscopic atom together
Yes.
and the force governing the global evolution of the entire cosmos are intrinsically linked by the exact same geometric ratio.
They share the same heartbeat.
The universe is literally tuning itself to phi at every conceivable scale.
Yes. The universe acts as an acoustic, resonating instrument, constantly tuning its own structural integrity. But the implications of these master equations go even further, entering territory that sounds almost like science fiction, but is rooted in rigorous mathematics.
Oh, I was waiting for this part.
By manipulating these master equations, the paper derives something called the resonant time travel theorem.
When I first read that heading, I had to stop, take a breath, and read the paragraph 3 times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding.
It's a jarring phrase to see in a physics paper.
It really is, and it provides an equation. Delta T external divided by delta tau equals d to the power of 1/4.
We must define what TDUFT means by time travel here, because it is crucial not to conflate this with the pop culture understanding of the term.
So no DeLoreans.
No DeLoreans. We are not talking about H.G. Wells. We are not talking about a human being stepping into a mechanical pod, spinning some dials, and physically emerging in the year 1800.
Okay, good to clarify.
The theory is describing the structural inversion of the lattice's temporal memory.
Okay, unpack that for me, because the theory dictates that temporal architecture is built on quadrants, right?
Yes.
It says the universe allows for forward member time, which I assume is our normal, everyday experience of time moving forward, the future streaming toward us.
That's right.
But it also mathematically allows for inverted memory time, which are past streams. And it says this inversion happens via phase flips on the phi axis.
Remember that in this framework, time is treated as a physical density parameter within the lattice. The g equals 1 over t to the fourth equation.
The syrup analogy.
Right. Furthermore, the wave operator, Ca, represents time and contraction. Because time is a structural component of the wave dynamics, the mathematics permit the wave phase to invert, much like a sound wave can flip its phase.
Like noise-canceling headphones.
Exactly. When that phase flip occurs, the localized temporal memory of the lattice flows in reverse relative to the surrounding geometry.
It's a structural resonance flowing backward, not a narrative timeline rewinding.
Precisely. It is a brief, localized geometric inversion, a ripple in the fabric where the temporal interval embeds itself in reverse.
But even if we are just talking about localized structural ripples, think about the implications of that for human experience.
It gets very philosophical very quickly.
It does. Because we are physical structures embedded in this lattice. If time density dictates gravity and phase flips can invert the memory of the lattice, what does that mean for our consciousness?
Right.
Are phenomena that we traditionally dismiss as purely psychological, like déjà vu, actually brief, localized inversions of this d-coordinate?
A physical phase flip in the brain.
Right. Are we occasionally experiencing a momentary structural phase flip where the lattice's past stream intersects with our forward perception?
It's a compelling idea.
Or what about quantum entanglement? We have particles that seem to communicate instantly across vast distances, completely ignoring the speed of light.
Einstein's spooky action at a distance.
Yes. Could entanglement just be an inverted memory time connection bridging the gap through a phase flip? It feels like this theory completely blurs the rigid boundary between physical mechanics and conscious experience.
The mathematics certainly leave the door open for those interpretations, by redefining mass and time not as primitive, dead objects, but as a multi-tier, multi-dimensional resonance of geometry and wave dynamics. TDUFT demands a complete paradigm shift.
A total rewrite.
It forces us to view our place within the cosmos, not as isolated observers standing outside the machine, but as integral, resonating components of the lattice itself.
Which brings us to the end of this incredible deep dive. We have covered a massive amount of conceptual ground today.
It's a lot to process.
It really is. We started by dismantling the intuitive idea of primitive mass, the idea that the world is made of solid, dead building blocks. We learned that mass is actually an emergent resonance, the intersection of 3 highly distinct stacked tiers: the continuous ether lattice, the geometric atomic lattice, and the discrete pixel-like nuclear shell.
We explored how those tiers connect via the projection chain, understanding how continuous dimensional dials are forced through mathematical rounding functions to snap into discrete atomic realities.
Solving old mysteries like the argon-potassium anomaly in the process.
Yes, and we traced everything back to the Eternum nexus, witnessing how the golden ratio's expansion and the wave's contraction generate the universe from pi squared.
We looked at the power hierarchy, realizing that electromagnetic charge, voltage, physical force, and mass are all just different exponential depths of the exact same master coordinate.
They're all just d.
Just d. We tackled the contradiction of units, realizing that they just represent different architectural maps of a unified reality. We redefined the speed of light as a harmonic series, revealing that mass is essentially a 24-dimensional overtone stabilizing into a 3D fundamental note.
The piano key.
The piano key. And finally, we looked at the master equations that govern this entire time-inverting acoustic instrument we call the universe.
The philosophical core of George James Dukas' work is profoundly humbling. The conclusion of the paper steps back from the intense mathematics and states explicitly, the universe is not a collection of isolated objects. It is a single, living, harmonic projection.
I love that.
The exact text reads, reality is an idea, real only because we as transcendent beings experience it. Under this framework, mass is simply the lattice remembering its own geometric embedding.
Mass is the lattice remembering its own embedding. I absolutely love that framing. And it leads me to one final, deeply provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over as you go about your day.
Leave them with something to chew on.
Always. We spent all this time talking about how the entire universe operates on this projection chain. It hums with 24-dimensional overtones, and it mathematically snaps from continuous, smooth geometry into a discrete, pixelated physical reality at the nuclear shell tier.
Right.
But if mass is essentially the physical manifestation of the universe's memory, and the paper explicitly says that reality is real only because we, as conscious, transcendent beings, experience it,
then we must conclude that the act of observation is not passive.
exactly. We have to ask, could the focused act of human observation consciousness itself actually be the catalyst?
Oh, that's heavy.
Could our perception, our expectation of reality, be the very thing that triggers that mathematical rounding function? When you look at an object, are you the one causing those continuous d-coordinates to snap into the discrete K-shell reality?
The observer effect on a macro scale.
Yes. We might not just be passively living inside this acoustic lattice. With our minds, through the sheer act of observation, we might actively be playing its piano keys. We might be the ones forcing the overtone to collapse into the fundamental note.
It is a staggering implication, yet it is entirely consistent with the mechanics of the transdimensional unified field theory. We are not just in the universe, we are an active operator within its foundational equation.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly deep journey.
It was a pleasure.
The math was heavy, but the implications are infinite. Next time you reach out to pick up a coffee mug or a book or your phone, just pause for a second. Feel that downward pull.
Feel the weight.
Feel the weight pressing into your palm, and know that you aren't just holding a block of primitive dead matter, you are holding the localized 24-dimensional harmonic resonance of time itself. You are holding the universe's memory. Talk to you next time.